Hi everyone, I'm Jack Fremling Raconteur, and I hope that you're doing well. I'd like to share a few thoughts on Sunflower by Krúdy. This is a marvelous novel. It is Gothic, it's capital R romantic. It's a book that was evoking a lost world even when it was originally published in 1918, much more so nowadays. Krúdy's language is extraordinary. It's very florid, it's ornate. His metaphors, his allusions grow and sprout and create this forest of images around which we have 5 primary characters. And Krúdy's interested in this tension between the strictures of society and the demands of the heart. How do characters fall in and out of love? How do characters pursue their desires, even when it seems to go against their obligations to class, nobility, old nobility, wealth? And there's just this marvelous world that Krúdy is creating and then really inhabiting with beating hearts in Sunflower. But I want to give you a sense of just how quick and intense his language is and the irony that exists at the heart of this book. There lived in the inner city of Pest a strange young man whose white spats, carefully ironed trousers, and curled hair were visible mostly in the evening hours. The outward appearance of this young man resembled one of those figures on antique amulets worn around the necks of pious elderly princesses or seduced daughters of the bourgeoisie. His auburn locks combed in an old-fashioned style, his weary smile, his rather melancholy aspect, and his way of dressing in imitation of fashion plates from the romantic era of 50 years before were all calculated to make women's hearts open up, to accept and forever remember this young man. His appearance was as refined and fragile as that of a morganatic prince. His cream-colored gloves and freshly shaven face implied he was heading toward the National Casino, although his usual attitude toward that neighborhood was to eye the young aristocrats with a distant and disdainful smile, which dismissed them as idiots. At the time of our story, Kalman happened to be homeless. And right there, we have this sense of, where are we? We're 50 years after the Romantic era. We have a character who's sort of, an old soul. He wants to be inhabiting that golden past rather than this life he has now. He has this disdain, all of these things. The immediate contrast there between pious elderly princesses or seduced daughters of the bourgeoisie. Krúdy's always putting in these doubled pairs that reveal this sense of irony of, well, on the one hand, it's over here, but on the other hand, oh, it's over here. And so that tension, this pinging ball between where are we, what world are we inhabiting? And then the final line there, at the time of our story, Kalman happened to be homeless. Everything can be subverted. And that is really where Krúdy heads within this book. We're introduced to characters who we think are in love and who perhaps think that they're in love, only to find out that some entire other relationship is going to build and transpire across the course of the novel. And it's very effective. We have Kalman, the young man who wants to be everything that is like fashionable and old-fashioned at the same time, harking back to this other era in Budapest. But then we have Evelyn, who's the wealthy young woman who he's been in love with. We have a man out on this rural estate, Andros, who seems to even more so evoke this era of old nobility, of sort of aristocracy that the people Kalman despises, who has known Evelyn in and out, and perhaps has some past relationship with her. We have a man who has served as sort of a strange mentor out in this world, Pistoli, and we have the woman of Roman descent, who had Miss Mascaradi, who he has been in love with for many years, and who seems to perhaps have had this, deep secret between the two of them. And we see just all the different ways in which they interact, they fall in and out of love, and it's an extraordinary book. I want to give another example of how Krúdy builds the language. Evelyn sat by her window until dawn. She watched the trees soak up the light. Dawn poured over the city like farm-fresh milk. The dwarf shrubs emerged from the gloaming like school children with snow on their hats after the long walk to the schoolhouse. A solemn cypress in its black and white robe loomed like a melancholy gambler returning home at dawn. Evelyn opened the window. She saw footprints in the snow-covered garden. Light snow still falling turned the footprints into paling memories, and just as hunters distinguish a wolf's track from other beasts, so did Evelyn. Her hands pressed against her heart recognized the tracks left by her nighttime visitor. In a flash, she was on her feet, through the bathroom, down the spiral stairway, and out into the garden. Never mind that the doors were left open behind her. She tiptoed toward the first footprint, as if it were a butterfly in noonday sun, and knelt as in front of an altar, then bent down and kissed the snow, where her midnight's guest foot had landed. And we have all of these, again, metaphors, these images that Krúdy is just pushing towards us constantly. It's image upon image upon image, this tumble of dominoes. only to reveal some secret at the person's, heart, at the person's identity. And that's what he does over and over. The way he ends this long passage is, Evelyn at once recognized, the afternoon mail brought a letter. Evelyn at once recognized Common's handwriting. The envelope contained a single frozen stem of rosemary. Please forgive my robbing your garden. I repent my transgression and herewith return your flower, for I have no right to keep it. The wilted flower revived in the warm room, raising its head like a frostbitten bird. A wonderful, fresh, icy scent pervaded Evelyn's chamber, like a token of reviving life. And that's foreshadowing of something that will happen later on, because this is a world of fantastic realism. It's not really magical, but there are characters who explicitly tell fortunes. There are characters who seem to have died and then suddenly be alive again. There are deep parallels around characters who seem to be repeating a past. There, we find out there was another Evelyn. Andros has a father, and we find out the ways in which their lives parallel and diverge. And it's very interesting to see how Krúdy is examining this world and just examining truly the human heart through this lens of fantastic realism and through this just, exhaustive set of metaphors that are constantly keeping our brains, thinking and moving. We're constantly not just paying attention to the narration, but paying attention to all the images he keeps trying to evoke. And there's a way in which Krúdy is evoking Hungarian history and Hungarian identity throughout the book. There are references he makes. The way that he notes the inner city of Pest, he doesn't just refer to the character living in Budapest, but this sense of once these two cities were separate. Well, why were they separate? There were times where they had, Buda and Pest had very different identities. So what does it mean for Common to be there in the inner city of Pest? What is that cultural context? What is the cultural context of how characters are buried, of the specific, birds that are mentioned or flowers that are mentioned? And so Krúdy is very intentional around what he's doing here. I wanted to give one more last reading. The wild duck quacked in the reeds. It was springtime. Day by day, more of them returned to the land. More of those invisible beings from their far-flung wanderings. The ones who come again to teach the long-stemmed grass by the ditch to hum and sing. Who play with insects that crawl forth from the soil. The creatures that swing on bare birch twigs and screech at the highway traveler. It is these invisible hands that flap the white blouses women set out to dry in the meadow. They also dig quick runnels for spring freshets, squat in a ditch to teach frogs diverse cochonneries, grab a hold of the cow's tails and flick a light fillip across the snoozing shepherd's face under his tilted hat. They rip moss from the manor house's eaves, ascend like so many bubbles in the ancient drain pipe's dark bowels to emerge near the chimney, on which they plop down and sit, swinging their legs. They slap young wives on the back, pinch the rooster's spur, feed the hounds baneful weeds to make them run around all day. They are mischievous kobolds. Smoke rings, balls of air and sunlight. In a drizzle, they flatten themselves under leaves, squeeze behind the bedstead, crouch on the threshold, hide in the back of the car, tangle like invisible bats in the peasant's matted hair, latch onto his wife's chemise and tug his daughter's pigtails. You might call them breezes that arise in the raspberry patch, or warm drops of rain beating against the window pane so loudly that they wake the dreamer. They pick on the graybeard, press his head into the straw, and ride his neck with legs flung apart. And they chivvy young men as if they were starlings. And there again we have this tumble of metaphors and images, but everything that's described in that paragraph, that long paragraph of what's going to happen to gray-bearded men, what happens to the young men, what happens, pat the lover's back, every single one of those things is happening across the course of this novel. And so as much as it's this ornate language, this world that Krúdy is trying to create around us, he's also very intentional about how each time he has these deep metaphors, it's revealing something about the characters, revealing something about the world, and it's often referencing something elliptical that's happening within this plot. So this is an extraordinary book. I was fortunate to read it while we were actually in Budapest, and just it draws so much on a world that no longer is, and perhaps never was, except in Krúdy's mind. And the way it ends is perhaps even more true. Let crazy life rush headlong on the highway for others. We shall contemplate the sunflowers, watch them sprout, blossom, fade away. Yesterday they were still giants, but now in autumn they are thatch on the roof. And just as with that sense, everything is moving in this novel. I recommend it very, very highly. Certainly, in terms of touchstone work, I think Eugénie Onegin by Alexander Pushkin is just one of the critical reference points. The romanticism, the level of characters, these characters who are having this tension around their couples is perfect. In terms of the fantastic realism, certainly My Phantoms by Théophile Gautier would be one that I think sits very closely to the heart of what Krúdy's getting at. And I'll link my discussions of both those in the description box below. Another work might be the Manuscript found in Saragossa by Jan Potocki. This is a book set a little bit earlier, written a little bit earlier, yet evokes this same fantastic world, this same world of things that people once believed happened, and that, you know, at the time it was written, certainly still believed were happening. And this is a strange and interesting book. The tension and sort of the class tension that exists across Sunflower is very close to what Stefan Zweig was sharing in Beware of Pity. And these pair well because we have sort of a novel of Austria-Hungary from an Austrian perspective and from a Hungarian perspective. So these pair very, very well. And the way that Zweig specifically starts and ends Beware of Pity, I think, is very close to what Krúdy accomplishes in Sunflower. Certainly in terms of Gothic literature, I would include the neo-Gothic writer Ray Russell, who wrote just absolutely fantastic stories in Haunted Castles. And the way that there's this intense romance, this intense passion, and also this incredible world of metaphor and imagery is certainly recalling Layli and Majnun by Nizami Ganjabi, one of just my favorite works that I've read. Other works that I was reminded of, certainly Women in Love by D.H. Lawrence. I said high romantics, that seems to be a touchstone for where Krúdy is going. Another writer would be Honoré de Balzac. The way that the entire world is drawn, we have all these details around life in Pesh, life in the countryside. What is a day like for these characters? What are the social occasions like that govern their lives? Recalls certainly Honoré de Balzac. And I would say Balzac's irony is probably very close as well to what Krúdy is doing. Another work would be the Earrings of Madame Day, or Madame Day by Louise de Vilmorin. Brilliant French novella. 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel García Márquez. Of course, The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov. And a much later work that from Hungary that draws in a very different direction around things that are happening, but has this set of fantastic realism, has these questions around identity, but moves in a much, I'd say, darker, nihilistic direction would certainly be Saint Tango by Krasnohorkai Laszlo. And then finally, another work I discovered on our trip, a Czech work, was the Sufferings of Prince Sternenhoch by Ladislav Klíma. And this is a book that is a phantasmagoria. It is incredibly nihilistic, incredibly dark, and very Gothic romance in a much, much darker direction. But this is a book I'll be talking about in the near future. So I hope everyone's doing well. Thanks.